Listen, I do not think that Lane Kiffin is going to be the next coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide.
So quit asking.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran as a member of the national media at Yahoo Sports. Did a little time at WSMV in Nashville as well. Today on the show, we'll tell you why Ole Miss fans probably shouldn't worry about Lane Kiffin to Alabama right now, unless a lot of people says no. That's kind of where we are at the moment. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. I'm pretty fired up about that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right. I tell people all the time that I don't think you need to worry, and I'm an excellent barometer for worrying. So you can go off of me to when you actually need to worry. And this is not a situation I think that you need to worry. Now, there's a couple of things that happened over the course of the day yesterday that lets me know that Lane Kiffin was a rumored candidate for about 12 hours. People in Alabama got wind of it and they worked to shut it down. And the way they did that is through some of their media personnel, some of the larger named media personnel as well. So we talk about this. Greg McElroy and Cole Kublik host a show in WJOX in Birmingham, a radio show in the morning, and Lane Kiffin is not an option. He burned too many bridges. He will not have his name vetted, according to Greg McElroy on the McElroy and Kublik show, talking about Kiffin and other candidates. Michael Casagrande, who works at alabama.al.com and all of that, he's been kind of ingrained with Alabama football, as you can imagine, over the years. He says Lane Kiffin isn't happening. And, you know, me and him talked back and forth talking about the generation that everybody throws Lane Kiffin's name into a situation because it clicks. And that is the first step. Whenever you realize that multiple names are all of a sudden saying this, that is probably because it is being shot down from a higher up source wherever they are, whenever they're talking, whatever's going on. Now, we've all seen that Dan Lanning actually used this Alabama job as a way to have the mother of all PR moves that he did. And I did say everybody is interested in this job. Even Dan Lanning is interested in this job. He is interested, and it turns out, to get him a bump to where he is currently. But everybody's going to have an interest in this job being open, including Lane Kiffin, including Jeff Lebby, including Will Hall. They all care about this job. And if it was offered to them, they would probably take it. But this is kind of like a tornado, right? This is a situation to where this job is going to take the belongings of one unlucky family. It's as simple as that. It's going to be one school that gets completely wrecked in the aftermath of this search. And it's just going to happen. But the damage swath is not going to be crazy wide. I do not think that Ole Miss is going to be that school. Because remember, when it comes to Lane Kiffin in Alabama, we need to remember that Alabama had to relieve him of his duties a week before the national championship game before he took the FAU job. The same people that made that decision are the ones that are making the decision on what to hire, who to hire in the next coach. And so if you do that in what is they consider is the biggest game of their life, the next national championship is always the biggest game in your life. They're not going to be willing to hand the keys to the kingdom over to Lane Kiffin. That's what Greg McElroy means by some bridges being burned. That's what Michael Casagrande is talking about, him not being a candidate. And another thing that you can look at right here, here's just a list, right? List of candidates. You have Mike Norvell, Steve Sarkisian, Urban Meyer, Mel Tucker. That's from our friend at Locked On SEC, Chris Gordy, all the way down. Lane Kiffin's like 8th on the list on this. If you look at the betting lines over here, Mike Norvell, Dan Lanning, who actually had just said no by the time this was put out, but Kalen DeBoer is on that list as well. Steve Sarkisian. And then you have names like Lane Kiffin and Deion Sanders that are guaranteed people that people are going to put money on. They're click-based names, and they're not moving at all. They're just kind of sitting there, and these big targets are moving up, and they're going up above them. Mike Norvell right now, I'd be very afraid if I was a Florida State fan. And Kalen DeBoer, I'd be very afraid on that one too, especially by the way they played on Friday night. So I think that Ole Miss fans need to attack this from a position of power, honestly. I don't think there's a situation where you need to necessarily worry about the Alabama job. I think that Lane Kiffin would take the Alabama job, and everybody knows that Lane Kiffin would take the Alabama job. But I do not think he is on their list highly enough up. Now, you're going to take a lot of people having to say no before Lane Kiffin gets high on that list. But until the way it sits right now, Mike Norvell, they really like what he did. His PR work at Florida State is fantastic. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer has really announced himself onto the scene. Whether or not that would work in the SEC, I do not know. But then you have the NFL coaches to where you know they're going to make a run at D'Amico Ryans, even though he's not going to take it. You know they're probably going to make a run at Mike Vrabel to try and run it back to like when Saban took the job 17 years ago. But either way, you can find out whenever you ask the question, who is going to be the next coach of Alabama? It usually takes a while to get to the Lane Kiffin name. So I just generally don't think that Ole Miss fans need to worry about this situation. Concentrate on the official visit weekend that is happening this weekend and start concentrating on some players in the transfer portal that you can attack. And we're going to come back and talk about some players on the Alabama roster that Ole Miss fans might need to pay attention to with Pete Golding, with Lane Kiffin, with those guys. Indeed. So definitely thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. Ole Miss is just getting started. We are just getting started. So we've established that I don't think that Ole Miss fans need to worry about this coaching search. So let's go on the attack. This is the best roster in college football with a 30-day portal window that is about to come open. And you know everybody is going to be recruiting that roster. So we'll talk about that right after this. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still some time to get on the action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with a $150 bet. Or not $150, with a $5 money line bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, in that $5 money line bet. The app is so easy to use, and there's many different ways to bet, like same game parlays, or you can find bets in this new Explore tab if you are not the most creative bettor in the world. Maybe you can go over to the Parlay Hub, check out some of the cool parlays that are being set up in the FanDuel kingdom, and that's the best way to find popular ones as well. They have many, many more things than that as well. So FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so we talked in the first segment about how I just don't think that Ole Miss fans need to worry about this situation, at least not now. There could be a situation where a lot of no's happen and Lane Kiffin gradually works his way up the list. But as of right now, I'm just generally not concerned about what is going on. I get that some people are nervous Nelly fans and all of that, and Ole Miss has a coach that they desperately don't want to lose, and rivals see Lane Kiffin, and they want him gone desperately. So on social media, it just turns into this whole Charlie Foxtrot, essentially. I advise everybody just not pay attention to that. Enjoy what's going on. All the hype train is going to continue, potentially, if the rumors are true, by the end of this weekend, but we'll see exactly what's going up. Now, the Alabama roster with Nick Saban retiring has an open season has developed. And there are some players that are going to be interested by everybody. And there's a couple of players that Ole Miss fans specifically should watch for, and we'll talk about that in the third segment. But right now, I want to talk about two players that kind of have gotten my eye a little bit. And these players are going to be pre-portaled and transferred by everybody, okay? Now, Caleb Downs, who was as a true freshman, the top tackler on Alabama's defense. He was a punt returner by the end of the year, all around a good football player. He's going to be able to name his price in the portal. This is not a situation. I don't know if Ole Miss can afford Caleb Downs should he become available, because of how much that he can honestly ask for. You have a situation to where honestly, an Ed Reed type player coming up with that type of hype is being built. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the defense is going to look like. Doesn't look like it's going to be the Nick Saban tree coming up in Alabama, whether it be Mike Norvell or Kalen DeBoer or something like that. Maybe Alabama will hire an assistant coach like Glenn Schumann. Maybe it'll be Kirby Smart. I do not know. But it doesn't look like it'll be from the Nick Saban tree. Now, if that happens, and you're looking at that defensively, how it looks, what is it for Caleb Downs? All of this has been changed. The defensive coordinator, their head coach, the whole reason for him going to Alabama, it's no longer there. So you're going to be looking at a defensive system. For lack of a better word, you could be hiring somebody to come in with that wants to run a system that is not a match for your skill set, and it could cost you millions of dollars by trying to fit that square peg into the round hole. That happens all the time. Every time there's a coaching search, that goes on. Now, Ole Miss would probably at least contact Caleb Downs if he gets in the portal, along with everybody else as well, because Downs was recruited at least a good portion of the time by Pete Golding. He knows exactly about that relationship. He knows exactly what type of a player he is. He probably has a position that fits exactly his skill set, and that's why he evaluated him and recruited him to Alabama to begin with. So that will be a player that I think everybody should keep an eye on. Like I said, everybody's going to be recruiting him. He's potentially the best defensive player in college football right now, and his year two jump from year one to year two is going to be something to see. Now, it could be a situation to where he ends up at Texas, he ends up at A&M, USC. He could end up at one of the money schools, for lack of a better word. He could end up at Miami. Miami has a little bit of money as well. So we'll see exactly how this goes for Caleb Downs and where he ends up. He might stay at Alabama. He might hit it off with Mike Norvell or DeBoer or any of those guys that are taking that job. But that is a name to watch for. And as Ole Miss has a drop ad date that is so much later than everybody else just about in the country, they have a chance to take advantage of this Alabama transfer portal window. Whichever coach goes to it, it might be Washington. If DeBoer goes to Alabama, I could see something. Maybe Dylan Johnson goes back to Mississippi. Maybe if it's Norvell, some Florida State players hop in as well. That 30-day period is going to be very interesting to see what happens. I know that the Caleb Downs situation, I'm very, very interested, I should say, in where he ends up. Now, another player, and now I'm going to kind of get into specifically Ole Miss needs type stuff. I see Jam Miller, the running back, who's a sophomore. I think he's out of Texas. He only ran for like 200 yards this season, but he's a good back. He's a really good back. And as the season went on, he got more and more carries as it happened. I'm interested to see if Jam Miller gets into the portal over the next couple of days. I get that school has started already. I get that all that is going on, but like I said, Ole Miss with that late drop ad date, this is an advantage for them. Ole Miss is recruited and got a commitment from Logan Diggs, who I believe he tore his ACL in his bowl game. But Ole Miss fans, Ole Miss coaches and this training staff thinks that he is going to be ready to go by the end of the non-conference slate, which to me, that's like adding a month to it. So the last 4 games, I assume that he's going to be back, and then Logan Diggs will be available for the playoffs. But another back probably wouldn't hurt anything, and maybe a Jam Miller would be that back, somebody that you could pay attention to. He's a good runner in the tackles. Runners that come from Alabama are good running backs that are all around done. They did an excellent job of recruiting that position for the better part of the last 17 years. Just think of the running backs that went through Alabama over the course of the last 17 years. I mean, you can go back to Glenn Coffey. You can go back to Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, TJ Yeldon, Najee Harris. Those players, all around running backs that are really good at their job, ended up going through Alabama. I mean, multiple of them won Heisman trophies at Alabama. So whenever they recruit in Alabama, pay attention to them. Lane Kiffin had success with transfer running backs out of Alabama. When he was in FAU, he had one as well. I forget the names real quick, but that existed as well. Maybe Ole Miss fans should pay attention to that. With Roydell Williams being out there as well, I mean, there could be the transfer portal running back that is already there that you could get to. So we'll see exactly how that goes for Ole Miss over, I don't know, the next couple of weeks as well. Now, we told you there's some players that's on visits right now. If you look at 24/7, Daquan Wright, the tight end out of Virginia Tech, David Johnson put a crystal ball in for Daquan Wright. That should tell you where that sits as well. Lane Kiffin has a reputation amongst tight ends, so that's going to help. We've heard rumors of Yam Banks potentially committing after his visit, which I think started yesterday. So he's going on right now. And Gerald Mincey's on campus as well. So they're recruiting pretty well. I saw Lane Kiffin put on his Twitter, which he normally does, an airport in Jacksonville, Florida. Who is he visiting? I have not seen that name. That does not match the hometowns of the players that are on campus this weekend. I'm curious to see exactly what name that could potentially be. We're kind of national treasure sleuthing that on the Locked On Ole Miss Discord server as well, in between trying to fight off trolls as well on the Lane Kiffin Alabama situation. But it is what it is. So we will talk about more players, and specifically 2 players that could be of interest to Ole Miss fans, and there's still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss, part of the Locked On Podcast Network every day. Those 2 players in potential is Jaheim Oatis and Caleb Odum, and we will talk about those and why they might be interested in Ole Miss right now, right after this. You know, you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. You shouldn't have to do that. GameTime is fast and easy way to buy all the tickets to your sports, comedy, music, theater events near you. Easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. Views from all the seats in the arena. If Morgan Wallen's having a concert, you can see exactly what that would look like from your Vaught Hemingway seats. They have all these all-in prices that show your total up front, so you know exactly that you're getting a great deal before you check out, and you can buy tickets in 2 taps. Click, click, it's done. GameTime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. Hey, and even an hour after it starts. Like if you're trying to get into the game, you can check that. It's the place to visit for last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And with zone deals, you can just pick the section and Game Time will pick the seats for a big time savings. And the Game Time guarantee also means you also get the best price. If you find tickets in the same row and section, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. Now, two players in this whole ordeal that I think Ole Miss fans probably need to pay attention to. If we all take it at face value that Lane Kiffin is going to be the coach next season and the roster turnover is not going to happen and all the hype is going to continue, Ole Miss is roster building right now. That's the important thing. They need to figure out a way to take advantage of these other schools going through this. The way the rules are set up, you are set up to do that. And Ole Miss can do that with two specific players. And one is Jaheim Otis. He's a defensive lineman out of Columbia, Mississippi. Lane Kiffin recruited the devil out of him whenever he was deciding where to go. And one thing that's pretty amazing, in high school, Jaheim Otis was like 370, 380 pounds, somewhere in there. He was so large. He gets to Alabama, he's like 290. And he's completely trim and built. And he's the typical Alabama defensive lineman that we all think about. Now, he has a relationship with Freddie Roach, I'm sure. I'm sure that Randall Joyner has some sort of a relationship with him as well. And Pete Golding, does, because Pete Golding's a large reason that he is at Alabama to begin with. We're going to say that a lot. If it's the defensive side of the ball and they're from this general area, Pete Golding had a large part in accomplishing that. Now, Ole Miss on the defensive line already might have the best front seven in college football going into 2024, with the addition of Walter Nolan, with the addition of Princely Amonmiela, with the addition of Tyler Barron. You have J.J. Pegues, who is a very, very good defensive lineman in his own right. Xavion Harris at 6'7", had 3 blocked field goals this year. At linebacker, you have T.J. Dudley, you have Chris Paul, you have other players that are visiting. Kendrick Blackshear is visiting right now from Alabama, and Ole Miss is kind of a favorite to land that as well. It tells you with what's going on, Ole Miss is roster building. We need to pay attention to commitments and things like that, because there's going to be a lot of people in these recruits here about what's going on and the noise that they see on social media. So Ole Miss recruiting at a very high level. They are already really, really good. They can get a little bit better. I think Jaheim Otis would make them better. And I think that we need to pay attention to that side of the ball as somebody that maybe Ole Miss tries to bring him over. Now, another thing is the defensive coordinator at Mississippi State under Jeff Lebby is, I think, was it Coleman Hertzler? It's one of the defensive, the linebackers coach or whatever that happened whenever Lebby was at Ole Miss. He went to Alabama and then went to Mississippi State. So there's a relationship there a little bit with Jaheim Otis as well. So I'm not saying it's a slam dunk type situation. I'm saying I think Ole Miss should try, if that makes sense. Now, another player that is really interesting to pay attention to, and he went back and forth and he did visits and all of that stuff, is Caleb Odum, the jumbo tight end / wide receiver out of, I think, Carrollton, Georgia, somewhere out of Georgia. Really good football player. And with Ole Miss having a completely stacked wide receiver room, you could see how he could come in and be the next guy up, potentially. Caleb Odum, everything's going to get open. I mean, if Bama does this right, and if Bama is Bama, okay, let's not consider them operating from a place of weakness. And the potential is going to be there for them to operate from a potential of weakness. But the reality of it is you need to hire your guy and let him hire his guys. You're Alabama. It should recruit itself. You should be able to put together a top 5 staff in the entire country with all of the resources that surround the Alabama Crimson Tide. But you are going to hear over the next couple of weeks after a coach is hired that somebody is being retained on the staff for recruiting purposes. And I don't know if that will happen. It will not likely be Tommy Rees, who probably is a potential to end up in Baton Rouge. I don't know of who the person will be, but somebody will get held over and they'll try to figure out a way to make a smooth transition from one staff to the next. Honestly, if you ask me about it, just my opinion, Saban's been working on this for weeks, if not months, this transition. Honestly, I think that sometime this season, Nick Saban went to the athletic director and said, after the last game, I'm done. And the athletic director said, cool, we're going to start working on it, but please don't announce what you're doing until we're ready to do it, if that makes sense. And everybody thought that was because of the Dan Lanning stuff, which, by the way, that was a masterful PR play by Dan Lanning. Congratulations there. But we'll see with Greg Byrne and who he gets up. I mean, the two betting favorites right now are Mike Norvell and Kalen DeBoer. And after that is Steve Sarkisian. Whoever it is going to get a 30-day period as well, and it starts a domino effect. But I'm going to be honest. If it's Florida State, I'm not worried about Lane Kiffin. If it's Kalen DeBoer, I'm not worried about Lane Kiffin. At this point, I'm not worried about Lane Kiffin. This is going to be the last dance. They're going to run it back. They're going to do whatever they need to do. This hype train is not getting stopped. I don't see all of these coaches saying no to Alabama. The number of coaches that it would be required to say no to Alabama. But somebody has to be the Ray Perkins. This is the other side of the coin that in this hire, I'm thinking somebody has to be the Ray Perkins to Bear Bryant with a Nick Saban to whoever succeeds him. If everybody remembers the 80s in Alabama football after Bear Bryant, Ray Perkins, he was okay. He struggled a little bit. Bill Curry got a brick thrown through his window. And the 80s were kind of a mess. They brought in Gene Stallings. He won a national championship. And then they kind of went back into the doldrums a little bit. And then Nick Saban came in the mid-2000s that kind of turned everything around. I think a similar type situation is about to happen. Now, they have all the resources in the world, and nobody should underestimate what Alabama can do. But I think that it's naturally, whenever you go from the greatest of all time to somebody else, there's going to be a little bit of a step down. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Every day as we continue to turn our attention to the portal and SEC hoops. And Ole Miss gets Vandy after destroying Florida this week. For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For a second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.